Next thing, also very important, especially when in ArmA, because people don't get tired in ArmA and don't feel scared for their safety in ArmA usually. That's speed, and that's whether you're marching on foot or on vehicles. You always want to mention speed. And the game is pretty easy. You could say walking pace, running pace, or sprinting pace. Sprinting pace is usually not happening. Next thing you want to, and in vehicles you want to give a set of kilometers per hour. And I tried that recently. It actually worked out pretty well. Simply just saying, I don't want you to exceed 45 kilometers an hour. And in real life, military, in combat, 45 kilometers an hour is really fucking fast. It's like if your vehicle gets hit by an RPG, the chances that you're gonna survive the RPG is of course slim. But the chances of you hitting a tree and all of you dying from the subsequent crash is just as big. You want to keep speeds below 45 kilometers an hour unless you're being hunted by a tank battalion or some shit like that.
Question.
Yeah.
What's the jogging speed in ArmA 2?
It's fucking fast. I think they're jogging 18 kilometers an hour.
18, eh?
Yeah. And which is ridiculously fast. I know no person who could take 20 kilograms on their back and run fucking 18 kilometers an hour for even 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Soldiers on steroids, man.
So question, Godhand, when would we want to increase our spacing in between our squads if we're on foot?
Yeah. Well, basically, the greater the spacing, there's always limitations to spacing, of course. What I always like to go by is your spacing shouldn't be greater than half the effective weapons range or half visual range. So imagine you're on an open field, then your weapons range is 400 meters. But so you should space units out more than half of that, so they shouldn't be more than 200 meters away from each other. So they can mutually support each other. And if you're moving in a wooded area, you might have a visual range of 50 meters. Then you shouldn't get them farther away from each other than 25 meters.
Okay.
What about vehicle spacing? Or was that more into convoy operations?
Vehicle spacing is basically the same. You just consider each vehicle a squad. So you say, and in general, I would want a big spacing between vehicles unless we're driving really slowly down some alleyway in Fallujah. I want spacing of at least 50 meters, because if the front vehicle crashes or something bad happens to it, I don't want the second truck to just ram up in his ass and have the same fucking problem. I want at least 50 meter spacing whenever I'm moving anywhere, and I want them to move as slow as fucking possible, or at least 45 kilometers an hour. I basically don't want people moving any faster. Which is hard to enforce in ArmA, I know, but if you can enforce that, you'll see your casualties drop drastically. And if you get into contact while moving through a town, for instance, along a road, with only 45 kilometers, you would see that you start killing more enemies, and you can maneuver successfully away from them without just continuing through that ambush all the time. Because, yeah, I know Generation Kill keeps telling you, yeah, just ram through that ambush, and that's fine. Unless the ambush is well prepared, and you're basically just killing yourself. The only reason that worked in Iraq is because the Iraqis were piss poor soldiers. You could actually push through an ambush, but if you're doing an ambush against Russians or NATO units in real life, you'll just die if you keep pushing through. You usually always want to either turn or make a U-turn as fast as possible, because you want to get away from these guys, because they will have fucking mines or C4 charges or fucking AT launches from some sort to stop your unit. You won't be able to just push through. If you will be able to push through, you'll push through 1 or 2 squads. The rest of the platoon will be bleeding behind them. So yeah, but that's some considerations about spacing and speed, and that's where you really need to think as a platoon leader, because there are advantages and disadvantages to all of them, and you just need to identify what is a good idea and what's a bad idea, and that takes practice and reading. I'm almost out of breath, man. Okay, so next thing I put in there is regulations. Something we rarely do in ArmA, which is kind of sad because it's possibly the easiest way to organize yourself and to know how far a unit is along a certain route. And there are two major regulations you want to use. You want to use what's called phase lines and report lines. And a phase line is basically, if you go into the scribbler again, a phase line is basically just you having your marching route, the marching route gold along the MSR. Then you identify a point that you don't want to go past until you have support elements in place or you have the entire unit in place. So, and that's mostly also company-sized operations, but you also want to use them on platoon basis. And that's especially because there are some points you want to cross with your platoon. For instance, a high-risk ambush area, something like that. You want to have your platoon stop before phase line, spread out, and then go across that, because that's usually an area you expect contact. That orange line over drew that. That's a good example of a phase line. You usually put it in. Fuck.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, fuck it.
There we go.
You usually put that in relation to something. So got to try and put one down here. You see this line here. That could be we don't expect the enemy to attack us before we go south and get to these buildings, because they know we can take cover in these buildings. But when we pass those buildings, going further south, we might be a bit more exposed. So you might, as a platoon leader, say, okay, that's phase line Alaska, and our unit isn't crossing phase line Alaska until the entire platoon is ready and able to get into the fight once we get across, because we could, if we just push one squad across, they'll get ambushed and die. So that's usually why we put phase lines. In company-sized operations, we use phase lines because we might have this. We might have the main company effort moving along the road, but we might have some scouting units moving on the sides of the road, making sure that we're not being ambushed. And then we wouldn't move past the phase line until they have reported that left and right side are clear. Example, it could be a bajillion things that you need done before crossing a phase line. So the important part about a phase line is, first off, you can't cross it without the CO's consent. If you're the platoon leader and there's no one above you, then you're the CO. And then basically your squad shouldn't cross that phase line without your consent. And if you're a company unit like in Mohalevka Deluxe and your company commander put down phase lines, then your platoon isn't crossing them without your permission, basically. What you usually also want to do then is report before you get there. So imagine you're driving along a road, then 2 clicks before you get to the road, you report, if we imagine this phase line is called Alaska, then you'd report Alaska 2000. That means you're 2,000 meters away from Alaska. And then every 500 meters, you just say again, Alaska 1500, Alaska 1000, Alaska 500. And then when you get to Alaska, you report Alaska. When you stop reporting Alaska, if your CO says you're clear to cross Alaska, you might say Alaska 2000. Okay, clear to cross. Okay, then you just stop. Then you just drive on. Then when you cross Alaska, you just report on the net. This is 26 Alaska out. Just so people know that that you're crossing that line at that point. Next thing is report lines, largely the same as phase lines, but those are just lines we draw, and we report once we cross them, and to increase situational awareness, so we don't have to give log stats like I am at grid la da 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 da. You could just say any out, then everyone knows. Okay, he just drove south of report line any, or whatever you decide to call phase line. Does that make sense? Or have I just confused the hell of you guys?
No, makes sense.
Yeah, it made sense.
Nice.
That's okay.
Okay, so that's an easy measure for command and control. Should be used more, but people since people don't really know how to use and doesn't really appreciate it, it's rarely used, and I usually don't have success trying to implement it on the server because you get the feeling that you just have like 30 gamers staring at you saying, "What the fuck is a phase line?"
I actually have used phase lines, but I didn't like. I thought they were the same as report lines, as you can just pass them, and you can report it in, but you can just pass them without me clearing it. I didn't know of report lines basically. I thought it was just phase lines.
Okay, so that okay, but at least you're trying to use some measures of control. Yeah, that's why we differ between phase and report line. You can almost hear it in the word phase line. It's a line that indicates we're entering a new phase of the operation. So once we cross this line, we can expect contact, or we can expect to be within friendly territory because we went on the friendly side of the phase line. But that's basically what we use them for. That's to indicate what phase of the operation a unit is in. So a company CEO can call his battalion CEO and say, "Okay, my element is now crossing phase line Alaska." Okay, so battalion CEO knows. Okay, we fucking started the phase Alaska, and we're gonna be doing stuff in relation to that, so forth. Yeah. Any other questions?
What's the difference between a report line and a phase line?
Report line, it's just the line you report when you cross.
Oh.
So you can put down like I have on the map. You have report line any, and then what you're saying is once you crossing south of any, you're just reporting 26. This is 21 any over. Then 2126 copy any. That's just a simple way of saying I am south of report line any at this point.
All right.
And then we have a phase line, and that's used as a planning tool. So, where report lines are just to give situational awareness, phase lines are to stop people from getting too far ahead of each other. So you could imagine if you have different units, like you have ArmA and you have APCs and you have infantry, then you make phase lines to make sure the ArmA doesn't get ahead of the infantry, and you make or vice versa. You make sure that your units are concentrated and massed, so you can so they can mutually support each other. As we learned in Principles of War, we always want to apply mass to the enemy. We always want to center our forces to a common goal. We don't want to spread out like we sometimes do, because evidently, even if we succeed, we've wasted a lot of time fighting the enemy instead of concentrating our forces and beating them in a fast and efficient way. And that's what we use phase lines for, so we can get our units close together and then punch through the enemy lines where we intend to, when we intend to.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. Last two things are objectives in route, and you can easily imagine this. You have a main objective and you have some secondary objectives, and you might want to fix those objectives in route. And this is why you give your briefing for those. It could be there is a crash site here that we have to check out, blow up before we move on to this phase line. Then you give your briefing for that, in objectives en route. It could also be monitor CBRN contaminations, or it could be maintain hearts and minds, talk to civilians en route. Civilian military corporation needs to talk to some locals about building a well, etc., etc. That's random objectives en route that you usually get whenever you're doing a march. And very last thing is common orders, and that's anything deviating from SOPs. We all have the SOPs for dealing with, but we might have something different. We might have changed our mob posture. Might be wearing. Might say, okay, when we cross Faceline Alaska, we expect to fight dirty, so gas mask on at Faceline Alaska. That could be a common order. If you're fighting in a weird country like Afghanistan, where the main threats are IDs, then you want to make some emergency procedures for the IDs. You might say, okay, if a vehicle's hit by an ID, the entire platoon just stops. We'll try and salvage the front vehicle. We won't move the vehicles. We'll move minesweepers up, check the vehicle, make sure there's no more mines around it. Then we'll evacuate the wounded personnel. Then we'll salvage the vehicle and we'll head back to the FOB. That could be an emergency procedure. Shit like that. It's anything that's out of the ordinary that you think you need to mention. And personally, I like to always mention in some sort of emergency procedures in the common orders, just to make sure that people understand that. Okay, I think that should be pretty obvious. Any questions on marching orders? Okay, cool. Next slide. So differences in marching and advancing. It's mostly a Danish term. I'm not sure it's used in the US or Canada for that matter. But we differ between marching and advancing. And marching is generally just moving from point A to point B, not expecting contact, moving fast so you can get from where you are to where you need to be. And you move in single file formations just to get there fast. You don't waste time doing all kinds of other shit. That's a rear action. It's usually not applicable to ArmA, but I wanted to point out there is a difference. You can march for speed, just from getting to point A to B as fast as possible, but you can also do an advance. An advance is, of course, when expecting contact. You expect the enemy to engage us. Like any movement we did in Afghanistan, that was an advance. We always expected the enemy wanted to hit us. So that's not necessarily in a straight line. You might figure, okay, the enemy has put up an ambush on this road. I'm just certain of that. So I want to move around here. So in the case from before where we had the march route gold and silver, you might want to go on to silver immediately because you expect the enemy at the march route gold. Or any similar action. So that's usually in advancing, you want to avoid getting ambushed. You want to prefer your security over speed. So unless you have a big ass battalion objective that you have to take within the hour, otherwise the battalion is going to be halted, then you want to think about, okay, how can I move on this target in the safest way possible? How can I avoid getting ambushed? Because I want to be the ambusher. I want to be the guy that finds the enemy and then sets up a platoon ambush on him and killing him. So that's what you want to think about all the time. And that's slow and painful sometimes. I tend to be really annoying at that point because I really don't like the idea of losing a squad, even if we're playing. So I usually go down as soon as I expect the enemy to lay an ambush. I just slow to a crawl and bound one or two squads at a time and have the rest of the platoon covering, just so I have maximum firepower whenever we're engaged. And people tend to dislike that too bad. And lastly, whenever you're moving in a formation that gives you security. Single file is not a secure formation unless you expect to be hit from the sides. You always want to move in a 2-up or 1-up or any kind of similar formation where you have maximum firepower to the front while maintaining flexibility. And that's why I like the 2-up, where you have 2 squads on line or wedge in the front. Then you have your squad, as a third squad, and your weapons detachment behind those two. And when those two get in contact, you can immediately switch the rest of your firepower onto either of their flanks, and either immediately outflank the enemy or close with them, destroy them. We'll get into that more in the start of February when we're going to be talking assaults. But yeah, that's something. Just some things to consider. And that basically concludes what I had to teach you about marching orders. We're going to be trying to do some practical exercises to see what if there's something you guys missed, and you can try it out and see what's game applicable, what's not game applicable, what do I need to think about, what can I leave alone, etc.
Sweet.
Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to do now, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Meanwhile, while that's going on, then go ahead and launch ArmA and log on to training server 1. I'll load up the training map for you, and we're going to be doing a mounted march in Humvees just so you guys can get some practice, and I'll give you a situation and some marching orders to prepare, and then you're going to give each other marching orders, and we're going to try it out.